Alright, Title 1, Short Title, entire Act. This Act may be cited as the Consumer Credit Protection Act. Title 1, Consumer Credit Card Cost Disclosure, Chapter 1, General Provision, Short Title. Style may be cited as Truth in Lending Act. Findings and declaration purposes for the Congress finds if the economic stabilization would be enhanced and the competition among the various financial institutions and other firms engaged in the extension of the consumer credit would be strengthened by the informed use of credit. The informed use of credit results from an awareness of cost thereof by the consumer. The purpose of the title assures the meaningful of the disclosure of the credit so that the consumer will be able to compare more readily the various credit terms available to him, avoid uninformed use of credit, and to protect the consumer against inaccurate, unfair credit billing and credit card practices. The Congress also finds that he has been a recent trend toward leasing automobiles over the durable goods for the consumer use of the alternative to the installment of the credit sales, and that the lease has been offered without adequate cost disclosure. And the purpose of the title is sure of the meaningful disclosure of the term of the lease for the personal property for the personal family household purpose, so as to enable the lessor to compare more readily variable lease terms available to him, limit the balloon payments for the consumer leasing, enable the comparison of the lease terms of the credit terms where appropriate, to ensure meaningful, accurate disclosure of the lease in terms of advertisement. 103 Definition of Rules of Construction. Definition of Rules of Construction set forth in section applicable for the purpose of the title. Board refers to the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, the organization meaning of the corporation, governmental, government subdivision, agency through a state partnership, cooperative association. Term person meaning of the natural person or organization. Term credit meaning of the right granted with the creditor, debitor, with the deferred, with the payment of the debt, and incurred with the debt, with the deferred. His payment term of the credit refers only to the creditors regularly extend with the range of the extension of the credit if able with the agreement and more than 4 installments of which the payment of finance charge is and may require whether in connection with the loans and sale of the property should be otherwise for the purpose requirements imposed with Chapter 4, Section 12786, A8, 12787, and A8, B1, B2, B3, B9, and B11 in Chapter 2, but the title of the credit with the creditor shall include credit card issuers with another amount but due with a payable agreement more than 4 installments over the payment of the financial charges may be required for the board shall by regulation apply with the requirements of such card user issuers to extend appropriations even though the requirements are by their term applicable the only credits open the board payment of the financial amount due is agreement with the more than 4 installments for the payment of the financial charge may be required, but the board shall by regulation apply with the requirements of such card issues extend with the appropriate even though the requirements are by their terms applicable only with the credit offering open-ended credit plan with the provision entitled apply with any such creditors irrespective of his or its status with the national person, any type of the organization. With the term credit sale refers to any of the sale with respect with the credit extending with the range by sale with the term includes any of the contract form with the bailment with the lease with the bailee with the or bailer or the leaser. Contracts, compensation for the sum of the subsequent equivalent excessive of the aggregated value of the property surface involved with the agreed for the bailer and the leaser will become no offer. Other nominal consideration has the option to become the owner of the property with the full compliance with the obligation under the contract. The objective use of the reference of the credit transaction characterized with the transaction is one of the party whom the credit is offered with the sum of the natural person, the money, property, services which are subject to the transaction primarily with the person, family, personal, family, household, agricultural purpose for the term and open end of the credit plan refers to the plan describing the term of the credit transaction which may be there under the time to time earned terms with which the finance charge may be to compute with the outstanding unbalanced unpaid balance from time to time they are under. The term adequate notice is used in section 1643 with the title with the meaning of the printed notice with the card holder with the set forth with the pertinent facts clear with the conspicuously with the person against whom it is to be operate could reasonably expect with the tab with the notice on with its meaning with the notice of the may be given with the card holder print with the notice on any of the credit card with each of the periodic statement and account is issued with the card holder by any other means of the reasonably assuring with the receipt thereof with the may be by with the card holder with the term credit card means with any with the card plate with the coupon book other credit card device existing for purpose of obtaining money, property, labor, and services credit with the term apply accepted credit card means any credit card holder that has requested the receipt of the sign and use of the authorized authority with the use of the purpose of obtaining money, property, labor, services with the credit term credit card term cardholder means any person who the credit card is issued, any of the person who have agreed with the card issue with the obligations arising from issuing over the credit card to another person. With the term card issuance means the person who with the credit card with the agent, such person with respect to the set of the card. The term unauthorized use with the section 1643 of the title that means the credit card by the person other than the cardholder who does not actually implied or apparently authority of such use from the cardholder receiveth no benefit. The term discount even in section 167, the reduction made by the regular play for the term discount even in section 167 shall not be a surcharge. Term surcharge even in section 103, section 167, the means of meaning with increasing the regular price to the cardholder which is not imposed upon customer paying cash by paying cash, check, or similar means. The term state refers to the state of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, District of Columbia, and the territory possession of the United States, and reference requirement imposed under the style provision thereof to include the reference regulations of the board under the style of the provision thereof in question. Disclosure amount of the percentage of the grade of the amount of the percentage required by the disclosure under the title does not itself constitute violation of the title, except the transaction titles do not apply with the following: credit transaction involved with extension of the credit business, commercial purposes, or to government agencies, instruments for the reorganization, transaction, security, commodities account with a broker dealer registered with the Security Exchange Commission. Credit transaction out of the real property transaction which total amount is financed exceeds $25,000. Transaction on a public tariff of the board determined state regulatory body regulates charge of the public utility service involved with the charge of delay payment with any discount allowed for the earlier payment. The credit transaction primarily for the agricultural purposes which total amount exceeds $25,000. Regulation of the board shall prescribe the regulation care of the purpose of the title. The regulation may contain the such classification differentiations of the provisions may provide with such adjustment. Exemption for any class transaction judgment board necessary to properly eventuate the purpose of the title to prevent circumvention, evasion thereof, or facilitating compliance therewith. 106 Determination Financing Charge. Shall otherwise provide with the section amount of the finance charges connection with any consumer the transaction shall be determined as the sum of all of the charges payable directly, only, or directly or indirectly by the person whom the credit is extended, imposed directly or indirectly by the credit incident with extension of the credit included with the following type of charge that are applicable: interest, time, principal, price, differential, any of the amount of the paid on the point of the discount of the system of additional charge, service carrying charge, loan fee, lending fee, similar charge, 4 fee of an investigation, credit report, 5 of the primary, other charge for the guarantee of the insurance protective and the creditor against obligated to default with the other credit loss, charge of the premiums for the credit life of the accident, health insurance, writing with a connection with any of the consumer credit transactions shall be included in the financial charge unless the coverage of the debtor for the insurance is not in the factor of proof of the credit extension of the credit the fact with clearly disclosed. Hearing person apply for the obtain with extension of the credit and in order to obtain the insurance for the connection extension of the credit, the person to whom credit is extended must give a specific affirmative written indication that his desire to do so after the written disclosure to him as of the cost thereof. Charges premium insurance written for the connection of the consumer transaction against the loss of the damaged property with against the liability should rise out of the ownership of the use of the property for the shall include by the financial charge unless the clear specific statement of writing with the furniture of the credit for the person to whom the credit is extended set forth of the cost for the insurance obtained for throughout for the creditor for the stating that the person to whom the credit is extended may choose for the person through which the insurance is to be obtained. Any of the following items itemized for the disclosure in accordance with the regulation of the board with the connection with the transaction of the credit does not need include that the item of the computation with the financial charge with respect to the transaction fees and charges prescribed by the law actually are and will be paid public official for determination of existence of the perfecting with the releasing of satisfying any of the security related with the credit transaction and the premium available insurance lieu of the perfecting any security issue but otherwise required with the credit connection with the transaction primarily does not exceed fees and charges described in paragraph 1 which would otherwise be payable to 3 taxes for any other type of charge for the downfall of the credit exclusion from which financing charges are approved by the board with the regulation. Either the following items will be charged with the connection with the extension of the credit of the security for the interest of the real property shall not be included in the computation financial charge with respect to the transaction. 1 fees and the premium title examinations, title insurance and similar proof of the fee for the preparation of the deeds of the settlement and statements for the other documents. 3. Escrows of the future payment of the taxes and insurance for the fees for the noticing days of the documents for the appraisal fee for the credit report determination annual percentage rate. 107. The annual percentage rate applicable to any of the extension of the consumer credit determined in accordance with the regulation of the board. In this case, the extension credit over and under the open-ended credit plan as the nominal annual percentage rate with the yield sum of the equal amount of the financial charge applied with the unbalanced balances amount finance calculated according with the crucial method of the allocating payments made with the debt between the finance for the amount of the finance charge pursuant with which the payment applied first and accumulated the financing charge the balance that is applied with the unpaid amount financed, or the rate is determined by a method prescribed by the board method of material with simply computation with a retaining reasonable accuracy as compared with the rate determined under subparagraph 8 in the case of the extension of the credit with the under for the any open credit card with the quotient expressed as a percent of the total finance charge over the period with the relate with the divided of the amount with which finance charge for the period is based on multiplied by the number of such period with where the creditor and both with the same finance charge balance the specified range annual percentage rate shall be computed on the median basis with the range except if the board determines that the rate is so computed would not be meaningful and would be material misleading with the annual percentage rate shall be computed with the on other such basis if the board may regulation require rounding rates. Annual percentage rate may be rounded to the nearest quarter with a 1% of the credit with the transaction fees and unpayable subsequently equal installation credit determined with the total finance charge on the basis single add-on discount periodic other rate with the rate is converted with the annual percentage rate under the prescribed procedure prescribed by the board. Rates tables and chart of the board may authorize you for the tables for the chart that may provide for the disclosure annual percentage rate, which vary from the rate determined in accordance with the subsection A1A with the section no more than such allowance as the board may allow. Board may not allow with the tolerance greater than the 8% percentum of rate, especially significantly complying with the regular payments if they involve the reasonable tolerance. Case of the creditor to determine the annual percentage rate in the manner of the other the described subsection C and D of the section the board authorizes the other reasonable tolerance form. Prior to January 1st, 1971, any rate required under the subchapter disclosed as a percentage rate may, in the option of the creditor, be expressed in the form of corresponding ratio of the dollars per $100. 108. Administrative enforcement. Compliance with the requirements imposed on this title enforced under Section 8 of the Federal Deposit Insurance Act for the case for the national banks for the comptroller of the currency, members of the Federal Reserve System of the national banks of the board. Banks issued insurance with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the members of the Federal Reserve System, Board of the Director, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, Section 5 of the Homeowners Loans Act of 1930, Section 407 of the National Housing Act with Section 6.1. 17 of the Federal Home Loan Bank Act of the Federal Home Loan Bank Board Act directly 3 of the Federal State of the Loan Insurance Corporation, K of the institution subject to any of those provision. 3. Federal Credit Union Act may be the director for the Bureau of Federal Credit Union in respect with the Union Federal Credit Union Federal Aviation Act of the 1958 with the Civil Aeronautic Board with respect with the Union of the Air Carrier, Foreign Air Carrier subject to the Act. 5. Packers and Stockyards Act of the 1921 except for the provided Section 406 of the Act. 5. The Secretary of Agriculture with respect to the Indian activity subject to the Act. The Farm Credit Act of 1971. Farm Credit Administration with respect with the Federal Land Bank with the Federal Land Bank Association, Intermediate Credit Bank and Production Credit Association for the purpose for the exercise any agency referred to the subsection with the powers of any of the referred subsection violation, any of the requirements imposed with the title shall be deemed with the violation requirements imposed with the act in addition of the powers under and provisional laws referred to the subsequent. Each of the agencies referred in that with the subsection may accept for the purpose of enforcement compliance with any requirement imposed under the style any other authority conferred on it by law. Additional agency powers. Except to the extent of the enforcement of the requirements imposed with the title of specifically committed to the sum of the other government agencies within subsection A of the Federal Trade Commission shall be enforced. Such requirements are purchased for the extra Federal Trade Commission with the function of the power of the Federal Trade Commission and violation of the requirement imposed with the title shall be deemed with the violation requirement imposed with the under the Act. All of the function and power of the Federal Trade Transmission of the Federal Trade Commission are available with the Commission enforcing and complying with any of the personal requirement imposed under the title irrespectively whether the person is engaged with the commercial meet with the other jurisdiction test of the Federal Trade Commission. Rules and regulation authority of the board is issued regulation under the title but does not impair with the authority of any other agencies designated with the section to make rules affecting its own pursuit with enforcement complying with the requirements imposed under the title. Section 109, view of the other agency and the exercise function under the title of the board may obtain with the request of the view of any of the federal agency without the judgment of the board exercise of the regulatory supervisory function with respect to any class of creditors subject to the title of the advisory committee 110 and 111 effective on other laws. A, the title does not annul, alter, or effectively exempt any of the creditor for complying with the law of the state relating to the disclosure of information connection with the credit transactions and with the extent of the laws of the law with inconsistent with the provision of the title of regulation they are under, then only the extent of the inconsistency with the title does not otherwise annul, alter, or affect the manner of the meaning and scope of application of the law of state, including but not limited to the law relating to the type of the bounds of the rate of change of the element and the elements of the charge of the personal permissible under such laws of the connection with the extension of the use of the credit in order of the title and extent of the applicable to the laws to any of the class of the person transaction in which they not otherwise apply an action pursuant to any of the court involved with the consumer credit sale with the disclosure of the annual percentage rate as required under the title of the connection with the sale may be received as evidence for the sale as was alone any type of the transaction other than credit sale and contracts under the state of the federal law simply specified in section 125, 130, and 160C with the title of regulation issued there under but do not affect the validity and enforceability of any contract obligation under state and federal law. 112, criminal liability for the willful and knowingly violation. Whoever the willfully knowingly gives false and inaccurate information fails to provide information which he or she would require with the disclosure under the provision of the title of the regulation under this issue thereunder, using any chapter of the table of the authorized by the board on section 107 and 7 of the manner consistently understated the annual percentage of the rate determined under section 107A1A. 3. Otherwise fails to comply with any of the requirements imposed under this title. Shall be not fined more than $5,000 or imprisoned no more than 1 year or both. 113 penalties happen with the government agency with no civil or criminal discipline provided under the title of the violation thereof that may be imposed upon the United States or any other agency thereupon or upon any state with public subdivision thereof with any of the agency with a state or public subdivision. 114 reports of board and attorney general no later than January 3rd after each year of the 1969 of the board with the attorney general shall respect with the bank the report of the Congress and concern with the administration over their function under this title that includes such recommendations. The board with the attorney general respect with the deemed necessary with the appropriate additional in each of the report over the board shall include the assessment of the extent with which complying with the requirements imposed at the end of the title to be achieved with the 115 liability assigners. Simply otherwise specifically providing the child with a civil action violation with the title that may be brought against the original creditor, any of the creditor transaction may be maintained against any subsequent assigner of the original with the creditor with the violation with which alleged of the liability arose with the apparently face of the instrument signed unless the assignment is involuntary. Chapter 2, Credit Transactions.